Yes, so then we will start the session.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm here live in the studio with Omar Niamut. Omar is from TNO. And thank you so much for coming, Omar. We really appreciate it. And as you already told me and my colleague, this is the last session of the Surf Research Week. So let's make it a special one.
Happy to be here and to present in this final session.
Great.
So thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Okay, I will introduce you. Omar leads the research on social XR at TNO. Omar has over 20 years of experience in developing media technology. He has published over about 50 articles, and he has over 40 patent applications. So that's quite a record.
Thank you.
It's very modest, but I think it's really great. In your session, you are going to talk a bit more about building the metaverse.
That's correct.
And then by breaking barriers, by connecting human experience. So I'm very excited to hear a bit more about that. But first, a question, maybe a personal question.
Okay, wow.
So get ready. What made you decide to dedicate your career to metaverse?
Oh, that is a very interesting one. So for me, metaverse is a term that re-emerged only recently. And before that, I would say that I was in the business of connecting people, which is part of the mission of TNO.
Yes.
And throughout my career with media technologies, I have been trying to do so in the real world, in the virtual world, and across realities. And now I actually have this re-emerging label that everybody uses, and that's why I'm saying I'm building for the metaverse nowadays.
Wow.
And connecting people is something that comes from, I think we all recognize when you are with friends, with family, with colleagues, with co-workers, and you share an experience, that is something that enriches you.
Yes.
And that is useful in many ways. You learn, you grow, and you can achieve certain things.
Exactly.
So I hope that gives some impression of why I'm in this business and this research direction.
Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Excellent.
So
let me share my screen so people start to see my presentation as well. You should be able to see the starting screen of today. Welcome everybody online. Unfortunately, I cannot see you, but I feel your presence. I'm very happy to be here and be invited to talk about the metaverse and hopefully clarify some elements of this exciting term and this exciting developments. And the entire title is indeed Towards the Metaverse, Breaking Barriers by Connecting Human Experiences. And I hope to say something about all of the words in that sentence. And in particular, after this session, I would hope that you remember a number of things, that you now have some idea of what the metaverse is or what it can become, that you know what you can do in a metaverse, that you know how XR technology, and in particular social XR technology, enables the metaverse. Unfortunately, I think you will be somewhat concerned about some of the developments around the metaverse, but most importantly, I hope you understand the importance of these developments, and that especially when it comes to research and development within the Netherlands, that we should all look at this and see what we can do. So you've already had the short introduction, so we'll skip most of this slide. But my main role and the reason why I'm presenting this story is I'm a lead scientist at TNO. I lead a research program on social extended reality. Much more about that later in the talk. I've had a number of other roles, mostly revolving around developing media technology for connecting people. And when I'm not working, I'm still in VR, but then as a gamer or as a fitness enthusiast. And if I'm not in VR, then I'm trying to play my guitar at home or on the stage. Let's dive right in and look at that first question that the audience here already had, that you may have as a virtual audience. What is the metaverse? And it's not a question that only you have or that I've had for a long time. But if you see some of the calls from news shots, from websites, you see that it's a question that everybody's asking. And one of the main directions that people are thinking of is it the internet, but then in 3 dimensions? Or more from an application perspective, is it the next social network, but then in virtual reality? And if you're trying to build it, what is the relevance of XR technology? And is it related to Web 3.0 developments? And what about biometric and neural rights and NFTs and all these terms? Okay, this may go a bit too far. Well, 6G also has a role, AI, blockchain, cloud, digital twin, edge. That's more than I can fit in the talk today. So what I would like to present today is delve a bit deeper into that question. What is the metaverse? I want to spend some time on XR and social XR and leave most of the rest out of it today, but it is connected. And I'm happy to discuss with you at a later stage on what that connection is and why it is meaningful. So coming back to that question, I have a perspective on it, but there are many people around that I build upon, that I read their documents and visions. And one particular one that I find interesting is Matthew Ball from the Metaverse Primer. And he has tried to set a definition of the metaverse that for me has many of the elements that are relevant when trying to define and then develop and build the metaverse. And let's go through some of those elements. So he says the metaverse is a massively scaled and interoperable network. So it's massive, it's interoperable, and it's a network. Let's start with the last part, network. A network of what exactly? Well, a network of real-time rendered 3D virtual worlds. So it's a connection of virtual worlds in 3 dimensions that are rendered in 3D. And now you might immediately start to think about gaming. And it's a connection, a network of those virtual worlds at a massive scale. Okay, we're getting somewhere. But it's more importantly, it's not only there to exist and to be rendered, it's to be experienced synchronously and persistently by an effectively unlimited number of users. So just as in the real world, we have, reaching a limited number of users, one might say, and they all can experience the metaverse at the same time. And their actions, the things they do in the metaverse, are persistent, meaning that they have remaining consequences. If you change something, it might be changed. Other people can experience that. And what is also important that for each of those users, there is a sense of presence, an individual sense of presence. So they all feel like being in that virtual world. And all of these elements, the connected virtual worlds, the synchronous experience, the scale, the sense of presence, all are relevant elements to me of the metaverse. And then almost as an afterthought, he says, well, there's also continuity of data, identity, history, entitlements, objects, communications, and payments. That's a lot. For me, it really revolves about the actions that we want to undertake, the economic activity that we may want to employ, and being able to do something there. So this is a definition that I really like, but there are more. This one, the top one, is from Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games. And we know Epic from, for example, Fortnite, which some might call is also an element or a virtual world in the metaverse. And he says the killer feature of the metaverse is simply getting together with your friends to have great social experiences. So his perspective is much more from the experience, being together with your friends, doing something, experience something, as if you were in the real world. And one of the other definitions that I really like is from Terry Schussler, who works at Digital Telecom. He is the Senior Director, XR and Metaverse, which says something for a telecom company, I think. And he starts from the human experience. XR is about enhancing the human experience, the experience that we already have and how we can enhance that. The human experience with the real world. And the metaverse is about expanding that journey, those experiences with others. So again, together. And the final sentence I absolutely love, putting an end between the real and virtual. So it's not only virtual worlds, but it's a connection between the real and virtual worlds. And I personally think that the real world should actually be centric to that metaverse development. Well, you know, things are happening when Gartner becomes involved. So they also have a definition. And by now, I think it's somewhat similar to what we've seen. A collective virtual open space, a convergence between physical and digital reality, enhanced immersive experiences. At the same time, their perspective on the metaverse is towards 2030. They say it's not mature yet. There are different phases of maturity. And we're actually at the starting point of developing the metaverse. When you say, Gardner, you cannot escape a hype cycle, and I like this particular one from Adi Barsif, who has done many developments at different large companies, Amazon, Google, but also Microsoft, for example, the HoloLens. And he created a specific metaverse hype cycle. And the interesting part, or several interesting parts, is the concept itself started already early on. And I always say the metaverse is both a hype and a slow promise. Everybody is talking about it right now, but for people in the field and that have been building gaming engines, have been looking at connection between people, they finally see their long-standing ideas somewhat realized. And at the same time, we see the perspective or the definition becoming more broad, starting from the next internet to the future of everything. So really, it's not certain yet what it might be. But let's look a bit more at that history. It started, I think, if you really want to point some directions in science fiction, it typically does. There's a neuromancer from William Gibson who talks about a shared hallucination that is being felt as being in a virtual world, but the people remain aware of the real world. And this one is often quoted, The Snow Crash from Neil Stephenson, 92. And there, metaverse is really coined as a term. Metaverse, going beyond the universe as we know it. But if you see how it is described in that book, it's a 3D virtual world, which is the successor of the internet at that point, populated by online avatars of real humans. Many of the elements that we already saw in those definitions. And around the 2000s, we see actually a first version of that type of setting emerging, Second Life, based on the gaming engines and massive online role-playing game settings of the early 2000s. It was an online multimedia platform where people could create an online avatar as their persona and lead a second life. It was not yet fully in VR, so the level of immersion may have been a bit lower, but it's definitely going towards that idea. Also clear, why are we talking about the metaverse today? That is obviously because a company formerly known as Facebook and now as Meta, and that made a pivot from their original idea of connecting people through social networks to a company building for the metaverse. And that's why everybody's jumping on it. And for some, that is new. And for others, is we now see these developments converging a bit. And at the same time, it's still a bit of Wild Wild West. Let's look a bit at that vision from Meta on the metaverse. And we see quite some interesting elements. We see avatar creation becoming increasingly more lifelike. Maybe not this example, but if you look at Meta's codec avatar developments, you will see an increasing level of realism. At the same time, we see a larger variety in avatars and human representation, and the notion that you might use different avatars depending on the setting that you would become active in. We see virtual worlds becoming part of the metaverse, but we also see the use of holograms in the real world. So there's all these elements across realities and human representation to have meaningful human experiences in all of those realities. So let's talk a bit more about what we can then do in the metaverse. I think the crucial aspect, the crucial promise is that in the metaverse, through immersive communication, we can make distance disappear. And for me and for TNO, it really started from the idea, if we manage to build technology that allows us to make distance disappear, we can travel less, we can combat climate change. Now, obviously, we've all experienced a setting that came about due to a global pandemic, and we suddenly started to work from home. We all use video conferencing for this, for example, the tool that we're using right now, Microsoft Teams. But you may have experienced, and this had actually been proven, is that all of that remote work increases mental load, and the term that we see in the outside world is Zoom fatigue. And there is a hypothesis that doing this in a virtual world, in the metaverse, that you may combat some of that mental load because it feels more natural, and I will talk a bit more about this later on. I think there's also potential for education and training. You can do things in the virtual world, in the metaverse, that you just cannot do in the real world, or where you don't have the resources, the experts are not there, you don't have enough training cases. And in certain cases, the virtual part, because it's three-dimensional, might feel more real and might enable a better skill transfer and better learning performance. And when you come back to the real world, you will see that what you've learned in virtual settings much faster can be transferred to the real world. And there's always the element of escaping reality, gaming, going to live events, and that will be there forever and always. That's a big part and a big promise and appeal of the metaverse. So I won't talk about all of that again because of the obviously limited time. I will primarily look at remote work and the reason for remote work to combat climate change. So I already mentioned the breakthrough in video conferencing. You all now know Zoom, Teams, Skype, WebEx are tools that have exploded really in the last couple of years. And we all know what it does. It basically enables 2 or more people to communicate via audio and video using an internet connection and to have live remote meetings. And we see some figures for Zoom growing from 10 million users 2019 to over 300 million users around mid-2020. So an explosion of video conferencing. At the same time, and this is what I mentioned, people started to notice that having a day of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 video conferences, Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, led to tiredness, actual feeling tired from all those meetings. And in the outside world, this term Zoom fatigue came up. And there have been quite some interesting studies, combined studies from Stanford and Microsoft, that this is a real effect, that you can measure this mental cognitive overload all the way to brain level. And the rationale, the hypothesis that has been investigated and also proven is that there are a number of reasons. First of all, you have continuous eye contact. In a normal meeting, you look people in the eye. It's important to make connection, but not continuously. You look around because it feels awkward to have that constant interaction at an eye level. And that actually, when you do that, your brain gets a bit into panic and says, this is not what I'm used to. You will also have an all-day mirror because you enable your camera. You want to be visible, means you can see yourself as well. You rarely, in your normal day in life, used to look at the mirror all day long. So again, a uncommon signal that is being transferred all the way to your brain. And then in a regular face-to-face meeting, you can do a lot of things with your body, with your movements, with your eyes, without speaking, non-verbal cues that help the other person to understand what you're saying. And that's very difficult in a Teams meeting. You're sitting, you have your face, and that's it. And also the limited movement means that the dynamics you normally have that might cost some energy, but also bring you some energy are all gone. So remote meeting fatigue is a real thing. And the hypothesis is that in the metaverse, in virtual worlds, you can enable meetings, virtual meetings, maybe even hybrid meetings across realities that can alleviate some of these symptoms. And at TNO, together with Dutch company Connect2, we have started to build a tool set, we call it social VR, for communication in the virtual space to see if these effects of Zoom fatigue, of remote meeting fatigue, can be alleviated. And I thank my colleagues Sylvie Dijkstra and Simardeep Singh for bringing me these slides and actually developing this entire setting that we can now use at TNO. And I want to share some of their insights with you. So the pilot that we have set is really to see if we can come to higher engagement. People feel more connected because they see each other in the same room. We want to study the effect of realistic avatars because there are already some tools out there that have model-based, non-realistic avatars. Can we increase the level of realism and see what the effect is? We study things like, is there repeat users, is there prolonged users, and basically see what is needed to bring these tools a bit further and make them actually usable. So in our pilot, we have equipped or deployed at 4 TNO locations several systems such that you have 2 seats per location. So in every of those 4 locations, we have 2 users that can join. We have fully integrated this in our way of working. So it's using a booking system that all the colleagues already know. And then we started to look for colleagues. There was a lot of interest. Colleagues trying to be part of the experiment, but also saying, hey, can I join for 1 or 2 times only? And a setup is actually very simple. Obviously, you need a HMD, head-mounted display, to enter a virtual world. We're using the Oculus Quest 2 from Meta. We use, for photorealistic avatars, capture by 3D sensors. And I'll say a bit more later on, but it's really a capture-based system which allows for photorealistic representation. In contrast to model-based, where you use the sensors and you have a rigged animation of yourself. There are quite some differences in those approaches, and I will say a bit more later on. You can then connect your own laptop and see some of the tools that you would normally use in the virtual space. And when I talk about the virtual space, I'm actually talking about a tool that has been developed by a Dutch company, Connect2. They have a very nice virtual venue space. They have offices, all of this, and they already use this with some companies to do education, training, and meeting. And we added the photorealistic volumetric video-based representation. These are photos. The best way is obviously to experience in VR. I think I have the next best thing, and I will show you a short video, see if it works. So first you will see me sitting in one of those meeting rooms, this particular one in The Hague. I'm wearing a VR headset and I'm communicating with one of my colleagues, in this case Simardeep, who has been developing the system with our other colleagues. This looks a bit awkward from the outside, but what I'm seeing is very, very different. I actually entered the virtual TNO office, which is part of the metaverse. So I'm virtually outside. Now I'm entering the hallways, and I'm hoping, obviously, to meet my colleague there. So let's see if she joins. She should appear any minute. There's actually a smart screen that I can connect to. I think she has entered the building as well, and there she is. So Simardeep is not with me in that same meeting room. She is at a different location, in this case also The Hague, but could be Groningen or another city where we have an office or the other side of the world. And I see her as a 3D point cloud. So I see a representation of her that has been captured with not only with a regular camera, but a camera that allows us to capture the depth, the position of people. And this is her view, so she sees me as well. And I'm actually telling her, I directly, even though the representation is not fully complete yet, this technology is still in its infancy, I would say, but I directly recognize her because I just saw her before in real life. And that's, I think, something we noticed when we demonstrated. There's already an implicit trust level. People directly have the idea, oh, it's the person that I know. And that's an important part for some cases, not all of them, but especially business meetings, intimate meetings with family. This is a very important aspect. So here are some of the reactions. And people really felt it as if they were there, as if their body was there. This is an important aspect. They mentioned non-verbal interaction because they saw more natural movements of a body. It allowed for more natural conversations. And what I really like, the feeling of being there together is astonishing. And this is what, for us, the metaverse is about. Obviously, they also mentioned the technical difficulties and the image quality, all the things that we're actually actively developing. And not only us, this is a technology that's being developed throughout the world. And in the Netherlands, I would say TNO, but also CWI in Amsterdam are really joining forces to make sure that this technology comes in the hands of companies. So all in all, already in the very first stage of this pilot, quite positive. So many more things to do in the metaverse. I won't look at that, but I will say something about how do we build the metaverse? What technologies do we need? And this is a stack that I think is quite relevant because these are all technologies that we know of and that we see being developed within the Netherlands, within Europe, and globally by universities, research institutes, and companies. Let me start at the top layer, XR, extended reality. I would dub it a bit unofficially the media layer or the human interface layer, but I think we cannot underestimate how important this technology is because it will finally determine how we experience immersive realities. And it will say something about whether we know something is real or not. So if you take any message from this whole presentation, see XR as a system technology that we need to focus on because it will be so relevant for the way our next generations will look at not only our current world, our current reality, but all these virtual realities coming up. But the metaverse is supported and being built by more technologies, absolutely AI, artificial intelligence, because it helps us to interpret the experience. It helps us, it supports us in doing activities and tasks. And it helps us really to make life easier, creation easier. There will be a lot of data technologies on the data layer to share data, to deploy economic activities, but also to protect our data. And obviously we need connect and compute technologies like 5G, 6G coming up, cloud, edge, federation, infrastructure. So it's this whole set of technologies that is needed to build the metaverse. And I think this combination of technologies needed to build something this relevant is an interesting one. Again, I won't talk about all of them, but I want to say something more about XR, extended reality technology. Many ways to look at it, but the most simplest one is there are sort of three versions. There's virtual reality. Virtual reality is about immersion. You put on a virtual reality headset and you feel that you're somewhere else. You are immersed in another place, another world. Could feel real, could be completely artificial, but you want to have telepresence. You want to be transported. Then you have augmented reality, and augmented reality is about enhancing the world, the actual world that we live in. You enhance the real world with virtual elements that helps you to understand what is going on. And then when these boundaries cross, you get mixed reality, where whether you're in the virtual world and it's enhanced by real world elements, or the other way around, you're in the virtual world and you enhance it by real world elements. That is a mix of those different realities. So I mentioned before that at TNO, we focus on social XR. And that is basically the set of XR technologies that is needed to build a part of that metaverse, and in particular to make sure that we can come together in the metaverse. I've looked for a definition, haven't found one, so this is my attempt at a definition. Social XR is a social interaction paradigm mediated by XR technologies where individuals experience social presence and engage in real-time interpersonal conversation. If you have a better version, by all means, let me know. I'm always looking for fine-tuning these things. There are a couple of elements that we focus on. First, there is the human representation, in particular self-embodiment, that helps you to feel that you're there because you see your own body and others can see your body. This helps, again, in presence, both spatial and social presence. Social presence being there with others, spatial presence being there in a space. We want to support multi-modal interaction, so not only the visual aspect, not only the auditory aspect, but also, for example, haptic feedback, social touch, the role of being able to shake hand, high five, or hug someone, all of the connection that we may have been missing actually during some years in take, for example, nursing homes that were closed. So it's these modalities that we think need to be added. And then the support of these important non-verbal cues in animation. So when it comes to that human representation, I think the holy grail for some cases is avatar realism. And one of the terms that we always see is the uncanny valley. The closer you come to that realism, the more clear it becomes for people that it's not actually real. The interesting part, and I heard someone at KLM saying this, that the longer you experience close to realness avatars, the larger the reduction of that effect becomes. So this is something I think that was originally coming up from the robotics world and design of human-like robots. But it's interesting to see when if these boundaries shift, if you have prolonged exposure to avatars. So we're getting close to that realness from different engines. If you look at Unreal 5 engine, for example, it's quite amazing. But also this volumetric capture with many cameras also leads to highly realistic avatars. And we're doing at TNO quite some experiments to compare, for example, with the model-based with volumetrically captured one, and to see what are the preferences, the pros and cons for these approaches. For example, model-based, it's clear that the capture and the rendering allows you to have low delay, high scalable interaction. Volumetric capture with a lot of cameras is much more difficult, can lead to high delays, but the representation feels natural, and it might be easier to bridge that uncanny valley. And also, it's more similar to an actual phone call. So when you're not there, when you're not being captured by cameras, your data is also not there. So think about where your avatar lives in the virtual world if you're not actually in the metaverse, and think who has that data. And I also mentioned this sort of implicit trust that people feel with this representation. So we've done some of the experiments where we combined model-based avatars with the realistically captured one. And actually in our Metaverse pilot, we plan to do a repeated experiment. Let me show you a bit how that looks like. So this is a TNO virtual office with a colleague sitting there being represented as a volumetrically captured avatar. And we compare both the human representation as well the environment representation as different conditions. So some of the other elements that we look into is whether we can transmit those human representations, those volumetric captures in real time over today's networks, which means we need to encode them. So we look at tools and we develop tools to compare different coding settings based on the variety of codecs that are available for these volumetric data formats. And that means, and you really should look at this through a VR headset in a very nice 3D scanned room. We see our colleague Frank in this case that has been captured, and his data is being encoded in different formats at different transmission rates to really have the experiment, at lower data rates, what is the quality difference? And on a screen like this, it's almost impossible to see. As soon as you set on a VR headset, it's much more obvious what those differences are. So this is tooling that can really help to see what are realistic transmission rates for this data, especially if you want to enable real-time communication. So I'm running a bit through some of the examples of some of the research that we do in this space. This is another one that I really love. I mentioned the importance of nonverbal cues. Well, one clear aspect is eye contact. There's an unfortunate issue right now that is people are wearing a VR headset, so we don't see their eyes. So that has two elements. You want to be able to show the eyes. This is what we call HMD removal, being able to in-paint their eyes and animate them. That's one element. And the other element is eye gaze awareness. You want to be able to see where people are looking at. So you can point and you see, oh, she or he is looking at this, or she or he is actually not paying attention to what I'm presenting. For example, right now, I have no idea whether you are paying attention to what I'm saying. So this is one example just to show that we are able to track the eye movement and visualize it. Let me try that again. In the VR setting, these are pink laser rays, which is just a choice. We have googly eyes as well. The most important research behind it is we are able to track the data in the headset and visualize and render it on the outside. And once you have this, you can enable eye gaze awareness, but it also helps for HMD removal, where we actually put part of your face back on the HMD, animated with the same type of eye tracking information. So let's move on. So I talked a bit about XR technologies, social XR technologies. What I haven't mentioned thus far is that people and you may actually be quite concerned about some of these developments. You may have concerns about who is actually building the metaverse or building for the metaverse. You may have concerns about what is actually possible, what the risks are if we move from, for example, today's social networks to really immersive experience that really feel lifelike. And I think all of these concerns are valid, and we should address them. And I always say, address these concerns in balance with the opportunities that the metaverse offers, and design from the start the important aspects that you want to be built into the metaverse. And some of these aspects to me are digital and data sovereignty. Digital sovereignty, so as a digital tool, as something that is becoming relevant for our society, make sure that we have freedom of choice. We don't need to build everything within the Netherlands, but we should be able to mix and match and choose and not be fully reliant on just one single party there. The same when it comes to data. Think about who has your data, who has access to your data, because the data coming from headsets, controllers, is extremely personal. It can directly identify you. There was a very interesting article that just from watching 360 videos and or movement in VR, within 5 minutes of data, people could identify persons with 95% confidence. So it's important that we think about where the data resides. Another aspect is we know the term digital natives from quite some years ago. People for whom the digital tools are no longer a secret. They know how to use it. we are moving to reality agnostics, people that can move seamlessly between realities and for whom the difference between real and virtual may not necessarily be there, which has positive instances, but may also lead to cognitive dissonance and a lower connection with the real world. There are elements related to this, like self-realious capitalism and constant reality capture. We need to capture people and the world around us to enable these things, but think about what you can do with that information. And questions about deepfakes, reality, what is real? Are we still talking about the same object? Those are important things to consider. And last part, maybe, we are moving with these technologies towards a zero distance economy. If distances disappear, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter where you work, companies start hiring from remote because distance is no longer an issue. And this can change societies as a whole. So it's important to think what the effect of these developments are. There's much more to say. There are, unfortunately, there are people looking at this. I would definitely recommend Ken Bai from VR Voices, who has a fantastic presentation towards a framework for XR ethics, and Kafia Perlman from the XRSI Privacy Framework, who have been on the forefront of coming to frameworks to design the metaverse in a responsible and safe way. We're nearing the end. So this is maybe my final slide then, the importance of the metaverse. I think what we see is what happens in the metaverse does not stay in the metaverse. And I mean that experiences you will have, you bring to the real world, but all those developments also have an impact in the real world. Those will be opportunities for the Netherlands in research. We need to make sure that we design it responsible, safe, and sovereign, so we control our virtuality. And when it comes to research and education, really consider XR as a system technology and think of the metaverse as your classroom. And with that, I think this is time to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Omar. It was a really, really interesting presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're still online.
Well, they are. We had 23 people online, so
Perfect.
It was really, really nice. We have two questions, and I believe that Macarena has the possibility to ask you the question yourself. So Macarena, would you like to ask the question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I learned a lot. And I'm curious if we make the distance disappear in the future, what is going to happen with some health outcomes? For example, if people are more sedentary and they travel less, so they move less because they are more connected, is it maybe an association with health? For example, increasing the cardiovascular risk factors or things like that?
This is, I think, a very relevant question that you asked. There are several aspects connected to this. That first, the very basic point of movement. So if you remain at home, seated, entering the metaverse, and don't move, obviously this has great health risk. And that's why it's important to think of the metaverse and XR not only as something that is in VR, but also augmented reality, because that enables you to still walk around the real world, but see, for example, holograms of people joining you on your travels. The other aspect is about if society changes because people can live and work everywhere, but some people cannot. How do we make sure that they are still connected to those changing societies? I do think that, especially in healthcare, XR and the metaverse has opportunities that allows you to bridge the distance, which might be a perceived distance, to connect, for example, easier to healthcare experts, where there are less and less of those experts that need to travel around the Netherlands. One example is that we work with a nursing home via the Meander organization in southern parts of Holland. First, to connect families that at some point, not less than 1.5 years ago, could not enter the nursing home, but they are immediately thinking about, can this enable our health experts to offer health remotely? And I think this is one of the promises. And at the same time, we should take care that people like with gaming do not sit down and stay immobile for a long time. I hope that answers your question in part.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Stop sharing. We have also another question from Suzanne Branchets. Hello, Suzanne. Are you able to ask your question?
Yes, I am. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. Really exciting possibilities for the future.
Thank you.
You mentioned one of the motivations for doing all this is to save the planet by using less energy. But you also mentioned things like AI and blockchain and rendering on screens. And I'm wondering, isn't that going to cost more energy than a plane?
Also a relevant question that has been raised before about these developments. There are, I think, different answers and perspectives on this. First, a very simple one. If you look at the energy uses of data centers and what they offer, you see that data centers increasingly offer more compute power as a whole, whereas their energy usage remains fairly constant. They are actually one of the most efficient forms of digital infrastructure that we know. When it comes to planes, I think it will be easy to show that removing, let's say, up to 15% of the regular plane traffic that we saw 2 to 3 years ago, it's very hard to get at that same energy level with these type of technologies. I think we should think about, for example, resource usage. Think of scarce minerals and what we know goes into a phone right now. That needs to go in all these headsets. Will those minerals be there? Can it be mined safely? Can we think of circular materials to build all this hardware that we need? But at the same time, and that not only holds for the metaverse, but I think for digital infrastructure in general, we need to think about lean ICT, digital sobriety. What is the level of digital infrastructure we actually need, and we should focus its uses on the domains where it's most relevant. And I do think that what the metaverse enables is a very relevant direction for society. So I would advocate for sure for that direction. I hope that gives at least my perspective, because it's for sure not a definitive answer.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Susan. I like also the sustainability aspect that you were mentioning, a small. So thank you. Well, I think that's about it. We don't have any further questions. So Omar,
I was either very clear or very confusing.
No, I think you did a great job. And yeah, again, it was really inspiring. And also, well, you already mentioned it at the beginning of the session, but this is the last session of the research week. So yeah, I also like to thank everybody that is online, and also all the speakers that has given big effort to all the sessions that they organized. So thank you so much. Yeah, this is the 12th session within 2 days, and I think we can be proud. So also. I wanted to mention that as well.
Absolutely, well done. And I'm personally very happy to see that Surface organized this event, that you have been organizing this.
Together,
We were also at the on Tuesday in the Jaarbeurs, amazing. And I think it's very important that these events continue to happen. Some of it may be in hybrid form, but well done. Okay. On behalf of all the others.
Okay, are you coming next year?
Absolutely. If I'm
Great.
invited.
Go to Omar then. Okay, well, bye everybody. Bye.
See you in the metaverse.
Yes.